with the contract standoff between Josh Giddey and the Chicago Bulls still going on, and future contracts needing to come up for Ayo Dosunmu and Coby White, on today's episode, I want to talk about this thing. Is this the last season that we see Josh Giddey, Coby White, and Ayo Dosunmu all on the Chicago Bulls? We'll talk a little bit about that and what it could mean coming up next for the Bulls if they do sign all three of these guys and the potential pressure that puts on Buzelis and Noa Essengue to develop. We're going to talk about all that plus more right after this. What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Hayes, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today, y'all. And I want to start off with this, man. So Josh Giddey, of course, is in his contract standoff with the Chicago Bulls. At this point, we basically talked about every potential avenue with Josh Giddey's contract ad nauseum at this point in time. We're just waiting to see when the contract's actually going to come down, what him and the Bulls actually agree on, who gives up what, the amount of years. That's really what it comes down to. But there's a whole other aspect of this and wrinkle in this that, of course, isn't necessarily at the forefront right now, but you have to ask yourself, when Josh Giddey does get his contract extension, which I still think is the most likely scenario here, what does that mean for the Chicago Bulls and how they view their financial outlook? Because they have two other names coming up that have definitely been big contributors to this team, and Ayo Dosunmu and Coby White coming up for contracts, and how that all balances together. Now, I've been one to say, and I talk a lot about the salary cap and things like that. The Bulls sit in a place to where they can re-sign all three and still have flexibility. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, right? But I first want to talk about what we're looking at here. So Josh Giddey's contract, I think, is going to fall somewhere between $20 and $25 million, right? We're just using that as a precipice. If Josh Giddey can find a way to gain more leverage, maybe he gets more. But it seems like when you add in the GM polls that we talked about on yesterday's episode, that around 22-ish, $25-ish million is probably where you're going to expect this contract to come down at. Coby White is probably going to be around 25 to 30 million, around that same area, right? So and then Ayo Dosunmu, his contract is going to be the most interesting, right? Because of injuries, his role, that type of thing. But I'm putting it right now between $15 and $18 million for the nature of this conversation. So that means on the high end, right, you're looking at probably close to $72 million between those three players. And the question you have to ask yourself then, and keep in mind, $70 to $72 million for those three players is actually a pretty fair value. I know people are going to hear that and ask, well, is that too much for those three guys? Keep in mind, part of the reason we traded Zach LaVine is you were going to pay almost $40 million or over $40 million to one player. So if you're able to break that up and pay three players that A, can all play together, B, all play different positions in a way. Josh Giddey and Coby have both played point guard, but I think, if we continue to see that they can play on the court together. But Ayo's played the 1, 2, and the 3, a little bit of 4. He's been better since he's been out on the wing at the 2 and the 3. That's where some of his best numbers have come at. So there's not really a threat of it being a big logjam. Would that be something that the Bulls are willing to pay? Before anybody gets to type in, oh my God, Jerry's so cheap he wouldn't pay that. Jerry only does not pay the luxury tax. Anything below the luxury tax, it does not matter. So no, that does not mean that he's not going to pay that. It was the same thing when people were saying there's no way they're going to give Zach LaVine the max because it'll be more than they ever paid Jordan, and they gave Zach LaVine the max. Now, that was way more restrictive than it going to over three players. So if you were getting ready to type, oh, Jerry would never pay those three players, he will, because again, you're under the salary cap. You're not even just under the luxury tax. You're under the salary cap, if that's the point where the Bulls' financials still stand at. And that's the question, is that how much do they need to show for the Bulls to feel safe in putting that investment in those three players? That's the question. And I do think that where some people, I do think it's a not a good argument when people say Jerry would never pay that. It's a better argument to say, should they pay that? Should they pay that for a team if they can't make it out the play-in? And I think that's a fair question, right? Now, I do think that ultimately you still need talent on this team. And for my people that are getting ready to say, well, they should let all of them walk because we should be tanking. They're not going to tank. The Bulls have shown it. They're not doing. Listen, for those that still think that the Bulls are trying to, I still get comments every other day. Somebody saying the Bulls are doing a covert tank. No, they're not. Like they've said it. Everything that they've done, everything that they've shown has shown this is not a franchise that plans on tanking. Now, if they start showing something different, all right, we'll discuss it. But as it stands right now, some of y'all are still holding out hope and trying to convince yourself a tank is coming because that's what you want to see. Not to say I don't understand why you don't want to see it, but it's not coming. They're not doing it. This is not going to be a team that's going to tank. So with that said, all right, would they feel what do they need to see from those three players to pay them? And I think that's a fair question, right? Is it just progression? Would 41 wins make them feel more safe in doing that? If they take a step back, they won 39 games last season. Let's say they get 37 wins this season. Would that then throw that up, right? So that's a question that you have in there. Now, for the people that also say things like, and this is going to be a nice response back and forth episode. For the people that say things like, well, you can't possibly pay all those guys because we got to save money to be able to pay a max free agent $50 million. In what world is a max level free agent going to come to Chicago of all places if they're not coming to play with anybody? Are they coming to play with cap space? Because then you better damn well hope that them and cap is just as bad as cash considerations. You're hoping that a max free agent is going to come and say, I want to go to Chicago and play with cap space. No, right? So, you need still players on this team. And I do think that there's a lack of understanding because the Bulls have never really had this much cap flexibility is what they are shaped up to have. If the Bulls sign Josh Giddey, Coby, and Ayo to all those maxes that not max level contracts, but the max end, the high end of those ranges I gave, the Bulls would still have roughly about $70 million to spend in free agency with a lot of role players still already under contract. Modest is under contract already. Of course, Noah's still on his rookie scout contract. Trey Jones would still be under contract at that point in time, right? So you still have that and you'd be fledging that out. And here's another thing too. I hate to burst anybody's bubble, but hell, we're already at the place now. I already done bust a couple. Whoa, that was a pause. I already done had to pop a couple of bubbles, right? Is that if you think where the Bulls are right now, that a max free agent is going to look at this team and be like, boom, we're off to the races in Chicago. You're smoking something strong. It may be copium. You got to chill on that, right? And so I get what we all want, and we all want this team to be great. It would be great of a max free agent to look at the team and say, oh, yeah, that's the spot that I want to go to. But you got to have a proof of concept. You got to show something. And in the NBA, it's one of two things you got to show. A, you got to have a star-level player that another star wants to come and play with, or B, you have to be a team that is on the precipice or looks like you're on the cusp of something, and then a free agent looks at that and says, that's the team that I can go to. We can get them over. We can get over the top. They already have a solid foundation there. I can come add to that, and then we can jump off to the races. Those are typically the things that you have to have if you want to get to that spot. The Bulls don't have either one of those yet. Now, maybe one of these guys develop into that. That's great. But guess what? The chances of it happening by the summer of 2026 are a little bit slim. And yes, we know that AK said that the cap flexibility in 26 is something that they're looking forward to. Guess what that means? That doesn't mean all of a sudden signing some star-level free agent. That means that, hey, we're in a place where we can completely reconstruct this roster based off whatever direction we feel like we're going at that point. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to sign some star. It could mean that, hey, with basically everybody else off the books, now we can go out and get and focus on that wing defender. We can go out and get and focus on that rim protector. We can go out there and focus on, because we'll have the cap space to make those supplemental moves, and then we can be a better solid team overall while still maintaining future cap flexibility, because then we still wouldn't have necessarily long-term bad money on the books. So it's not as straight line forward as what some Bulls fans try to make this thing out to be. And I think sometimes too, we get caught up in what we hope is going to happen, and more so and less so the logic of what's going to happen here. Like I can't tell you how many people have left comments talking about the Bulls got to maintain that cap space. We need to be able to sign a $50 million max level free agent. You motherfucker. Let's just be real when it comes down to that. It's not happening for the Bulls. Not unless this team shows something. And that gets back to the overarching thing. How much does this team need to show? That's the biggest thing that if for anybody outside of the tankers, their thought process, it don't really matter where the Bulls are because they just want to see the team tank and they want to just see the team because they think that that's going to be the best way to get high-level draft picks, which, we'll get lucky and find a star there. Okay, their level of thinking is different. It doesn't apply to this. But for the people that think like, oh, well, we need to be able to sign a free agent, they're not going to sign here if we don't develop people, if we don't have a core, if we don't have something that you look at and you're like, this is a competitive team in the Eastern Conference. Now, for those that have the doubt on if this Bulls team can be competitive next season, that's a different conversation, right? I personally do think that this team has gotten better. I think that this team has added the defenders that they need. I think with better health, this team can be better than what it was last year on top of an East that's a little bit weaker, stronger in some areas. I think the top has gotten a little bit weaker, of course, with Pacers and Boston being weaker. But that middle area is still going to be a gauntlet like it always has in the East, where that fluctuation is going to be very small and basically week to week when it comes down to that. So I think those are the things that you're looking at. But when you're looking at players that could be free agents in the summer of 26, like you still got to look at, like a lot of these guys may not be on the board, and I don't really see very many of these guys that completely change the direction of the Bulls either. So you're probably still then again looking at functional moves based off where the nucleus of the players that you have are here to add to that. Now, let's get back on the topic here. So that money, if the top end, right? You're looking at let's say on the high end, $75 million between Giddey, Coby, and Ayo Dosunmu. You still have tons of cap flexibility, even if that is the case, which I think some Bulls fans aren't really understanding. But then, what would they be willing to lock themselves into that? And that's the question that you have to ask here. Now, none of those deals that I mentioned are terrible deals. $20 to $25 million isn't bad value for Josh Giddey at all. 25 to 30 isn't a bad value for Coby White at all. Now, some people are going to say, is he worth that or not based off how they feel about Coby as a player? But when you look at a 20-point per game scorer who at that point is going to be your lead scorer, yeah, you're going to pay about $25 to $30 million to keep that guy around, typically based off what happens. Now, if the Bulls and Coby White can negotiate and get less than that, maybe. But then again, I think the thing you got to look at with Coby is that if he was willing to sign for less than that, then he would sign the extension. Part of the reason why Coby has to go through unrestricted free agency and not the extension is that he's going to sign, like the most he can get in an extension is about a base of $22 million. So because of that, then that's what kind of limits that a little bit, right? So you got to think because he can make $25 million on an extension, he's going to want more than that. That's why I put it between $25 and $80 million. Ayo's the one in this that you just don't know. You don't know what you're going to pay Ayo necessarily, but we shall see it, right? And so right now, the Bulls are shaped up to have $146 million beneath the first tax apron in the summer of 2026. Keep in mind that we've already signed, we have a full roster once after we sign Giddey, so you're not really expecting to pay a whole lot of money. So if you take $75 million off of that to give to Coby and Ayo and Giddey, you're still sitting with quite a bit of salary cap space there, right? So the Bulls have that flexibility. The question is that, how much do they need to see from this team to get to that point? And that's what we really don't know yet. But there is a chance. And I do think that if you look at those three guys, there's a chance that one of those guys is not back next season. Now, who that is and how you answer that may depend on how you weigh those players and what their skill set is. And I think fit. I think the thing that the Bulls have to look at most here is fit. And if they see all three of these guys fitting with what they have on the roster and the direction they can go, great. If they have any questions about fit and how it works with where they're going or what they want on the team, that's where you start running into some questions at. And I think that's what we'll see the answer to that over the season. This is still an evaluation season for the Chicago Bulls. I think people really don't realize that, but it still is very much an evaluation season, right? So if you were, for example, to lock in Coby, Giddey, and Ayo, that's three players that you're adding. At that point, you still have Patrick Williams, Isaac Okoro, Jalen Smith, Trey Jones, and Noa Essengue under contract. That means you would have 8 players under contract with about roughly close to $80 million still in cap space, and you got to get the roster up. So that's a nice amount of money and flexibility that you have in that. It's just how do you fill out the rest of the roster? What do you need, and how realistic is it that you can go out and get what you need? That's the question that you have to ask yourself there. And I missed Julian Phillips. Julian Phillips also will still be, so that's 9 players. So you'd have to add 6 players with $80 million. Even if you did sign one max level free agent, it's very much so doable, right? So you got to see how that's going to play out, and we'll see what the Bulls end up doing in that case. But the question I want to have to ask here is that how much pressure does that put on Modest Buzelis and Noa Essengue to develop? And that's the overarching thing here that we have to see. I think overall, the development of Modest Buzelis is hugely important to where the Bulls can go. We know that. And, I've said many times before, the Bulls can't afford to keep missing on first-round picks. Now that is Noah, that is Modest Buzelis at where we stand right now. Those are our two most recent first-round picks. You can't get it wrong with those guys. But if the Bulls were to lock in Josh Giddey, Coby, and Ayo, and then you, like I said, that locks you into, you basically have 9 to 10 players then under contract. You're looking at guys like Noah. You're looking at guys like Modest. And it puts an even more emphasis on why you got to develop these guys right. And that's what goes to Dan Craig and Wes Unseld. You locked yourself into this coaching staff, which, okay, you have your problems with. But when you fired Peter Patton, but you have two coaches that have been heads of player development in Wes Unseld, in Dan Craig, it puts an emphasis on why development is so important with the stage that the Bulls are at right now. Development is hugely important in that. And you look at these guys and you don't want to have to force them to do too much too early. That's something that Billy Donovan has talked about. That's something that Modest Buzelis even talked about. He talked about his frustration with not getting minutes early, but then he kind of understood the game plan that was there. And I do think there was structure in that, right? But if you go forward into locking yourself into a nice chunk of this roster, 9 players on this roster going forward into the future for the most part, that means that you're seeing these guys as pieces that their development can push your team up further, right? Because while I do think Josh Giddey's 22 years old, he still has time to develop. Coby and Ayo, they have time to, it's more refinement for them than still developing. And I think that comes with them knowing the roles year after year. But you're looking at Noah and Modest Buzelis, because if both these guys turn into high-level NBA starters, much less borderline stars or whatever you want to talk about, then that's what increases your ceiling of your team. And so while I don't expect the Bulls to be huge free agent destinations by the summer of 2026, maybe that changes if Noah and Modest does hit, right? If they both do develop at the rate that we hope that they can, sure, your hope then is that somebody wants to come play with these motherfuckers, right? So you hope for that in the case of this. And so I think in looking at this and trying to taking a step back and just looking at it from the business aspect, this is me removing my love of these players or whatever else. I would not be surprised if Coby, Ayo, and Josh Giddey, none of those guys signed full 5-year deals. I would not be surprised on that. And the reason being is that as Noah and Modest develop, and you have to also get ready for their extensions, which you got to while out for that. They got to go through restricted free agency. But if those two guys do hit and you do lock yourself into those contracts, you probably want to leave yourself a little bit of wiggle room in case you do need to make an on-the-adjustment fly. If Modest hits what some Bulls fans think he can be, and that's a star player in this league, again, I have a lot that I need to see from Modest before I can say that. But if he does hit that, you may want that flexibility with having Coby, Ayo, and Giddey on more 3 or 4-year deals, so then you can make another pivot if needed. So I think that's something to look out for over these next kind of bigger deals that the Bulls have to do, is what the years are on them. Because there could be a world in which they want Ayo, Coby, and Giddey, all their contracts to kind of coincide with extensions to Noa Essengue and Modest Buzelis. And if that's something that they're already kind of thinking about, it could work. It could blow up in their face, because if you do sign, let's say, Ayo to a shorter-term deal, and he comes in here and finds his stride, I already labeled him as a breakout candidate for next season, then what if in 3 years he jets out for a championship team? You open yourself up to that. But, that could be a risk regardless, right? Like, signing players to a contract, long-term, short-term, it's always a risk that they can end up requesting out, right? So those things that you have to worry about. But the development of Noah, the development of Modest has to be at least somewhat in the thinking of this. And I think in how we see the contracts fall over the next few years, it could tell us how much the Bulls front office also believes and is preparing for that as well, right? And that's just something to think about, because you now run into a situation where Modest and Noah are going to get their restricted free agents and their contract extensions 1 year after another, much like Giddey and Coby are now. And so because of that aspect of things, you got to look at that and say, all right, like you have to start showing some future planning. And, that vision won't really completely materialize until we're in the midst of this season. We kind of see how players are looking and how things are going this season. But it's just something to keep in mind there. It's something that I thought about today in preparing this episode. It's like, okay, I understand that there is a world in which, and there is a possibility, and I'll probably say, but at this point, maybe more likely than not, that one of Coby, Ayo, and Giddey are not here by the end or by the beginning of next season. There's a nice chance of one of that happening. And the question then is that if that does happen, what does that mean for the two that are remaining? What does that mean for the state of the roster? And what does that mean for the activity that this Bulls team has? Because if you lose Coby White, for example, in free agency, that summer of 26 plan takes a big, different look and turn at that point. And that's what the Bulls got to ask themselves. And unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, the draft happens before free agency. So you'd have to already have your draft selection made, have a feeling on what's going to happen there. And I guess we shall see. But let me know what you guys think on that down below. Hey, what are the chances that you think the Bulls keep Coby, Ayo, and Giddey all on this roster? And then on top of that, what do you think that means for how important the development of Noa Essengue, minus Buzelis becomes at that point in time as well? And do you see any free agent semi-major, right? Like a big free agent wanting to come to the team? I think this team and this front office has shown that they can make the supplemental free agent acquisitions, the Andre Drummonds, right? The Jalen Smiths, the Trey Jones. They can make those acquisitions, but we haven't really seen outside of Alex Caruso there too. DeMar was a guy that kind of teams were out on, but we haven't seen a big splash really in free agency. Does that big splash come within the next 12 months for the Chicago Bulls? Or do you think, like me, it's going to be more functional, structural signings to kind of help what you've already forged in the direction that you've already decided? Let me know what you guys think on that down below. Make sure you guys are following us at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullscentralpod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and or voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the #1 spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that's thanks to you, lovely and beautiful people. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See you right if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation